because we had boys in Africa, the Zulu boys,
Okay. So
African. We didn't have blacks. They were independent blacks. They weren't American slaves. A completely different mentality. Proud of being Zulu.
Zulu Nation. So today is the 17th of December. 17th of December, 2014. And we are on our fourth day of our interview with David Migdal
Teperson.
at his house in Kfar
Not
Shmaryahu.
Teperson. T-E,
Teperson.
not T-A.
Teperson.
Mm-hmm.
At your house in Kfar Shmaryahu.
Mm-hmm.
וצלם.
Esse,
10.
Kfar Shmaryahu.
Kfar Shmaryahu. Okay, so we left off yesterday. Let me just make sure. Okay, we left off yesterday at the end of the 1948 war. The war is over,
Mm-hmm.
and you get into civilian life. You get married,
Mm-hmm.
and you have 2 children. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
You have 3 children.
3
right
children.
At this moment, you have, and
2
it says
boys.
here, and you go into construction business with your father-in-law, and you
We went first to the Moshav.
yeah.
From the Moshav, I left the Moshav because then my wife was pregnant, and if you remember, they had what they call it, this disease,
Polio.
polio.
Yeah.
Polio was famous, you know.
Yeah.
So my father-in-law came and took we had two girls on our Moshav that got polio. And my father-in-law came and took us off.
Which moshav was it?
Moshav Habonim. Kfar Shmaryahu, Habonim is on the hill near Eitlit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it says here, I was accepted for officers training course in December 1954, and was drafted into the army for 3.5 months at officers' school.
And that's how I got money to pay for my wife. I was a married officer. I married a student officer.
Hold on, you're moving.
So the army paid for me.
The army paid for you for what?
I was a married man.
Okay.
I was in Kfar.
Okay. You were in Kfar. Okay. So it says here, my platoon was made up of the finest of our course. A1, it was an advantage infantry course. I was 28 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you go back into the army?
I always looked upon the army. I'm a married man. I lose my job, I could always fall back at the army. So I thought the army, like I did truck driving. I did a truck driving course. I could drive heavy trucks.
Yeah.
And the main reason I said, I'm a married man. If I lose my job, where do I go? This way I could stay in Kfar. I wasn't in Kfar, but I had Kfar as a support for my family.
So basically the army was a backup plan, financially at least. And of course you liked the army, so it wasn't like...
Firstly, I liked the army. And I fitted the army because I grew up in the veld in the country, and I felt perfectly comfortable in the army.
And you did, it says here, as I didn't know Hebrew very well and I couldn't read or write properly, all my exams were done verbally. And all my notes were made in English.
That's right.
And Latin and Hebrew. So they
accepted me as leadership. I had natural leadership.
Yeah.
And the army saw that.
Yeah.
And I was willing. And I volunteered.
Was it a hard course? The course
for me, not.
No.
Because you must understand that I grew up in Namibia, in the veld, with animals, barefoot. Where I went to school, we had no electricity, we had no running water. I grew up in 1700, if you know what I mean. All the people around me, you'd see an older man, you'd say, good morning,
I
uncle.
understand, yes.
And we were a whole mentality.
But you're not answering my question about the. I want to know. This is like one of the first kurs k'tzinim in Tzahal,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to know about it. It was, you know, it wasn't hard at all. It was like a piece of cake. It was like.
For me, I took it in my stride.
Okay.
I'm very strong, and I'm mentally attached to growing up in the desert and hunting. I went hunting a lot as a youngster, from the age of 10.
I understand, but we're not there now. We're in Israel, and Israel has just been. I understand it's your background and everything, but when is your first son born? When is your first
51,
son born?
51.
51, and his name is
February, Gadi.
Gadi, and your second son?
52.
1952. So there's 1 year apart.
That's
So
right.
you have 2 kids.
That's right.
Yeah, you have 2 kids. Okay, and you leave them for 3.5 months, and you go to kurs k'tzinim, to officers course.
And the main reason I went is because it was a way of, I lost my job or something, I could always fall back on officer's course.
And does your wife give you full support to go become an officer? She's fine with it, no problem? No problem.
She stood by me all the way.
Excellent. Excellent. It says here that you were sick during officer's course, that you have developed an infection
I had,
on your legs and arms, which were
I
very
had-
painful. The
I
doctor
had-
used to lance and clean them. He also gave me antibacterial, but I refused to take it. I refused to take sick time off, as the doctor recommended, because I knew that if I missed too much, I would be taken out of the course.
that's right.
Once again, my African bringing. I finished. Okay, and then it says here, so you refused to get any sick days. You were determined. You didn't want to. And then it says here, I finished officers' school on the 5th of April, 1955. At my diploma, they wrote that my moral under pressure was unbreakable. At the passing out parade, I was given the honor of carrying the heavy flag. What's the heavy flag? What does that mean? Like the
Israeli flag.
The Israeli flag in front of all the cadets marching.
Marching in front.
Front. So you were like.
I held and lowered it and
Yeah.
hired it when we passed.
And who was at the parade?
Dayan.
And who was he at the time?
He was Minister of Defense.
I think he was the. I think this was before he was the Minister of Defense. I think he was the Chief of Staff, the Ramatkal.
Something like that, yeah.
It says here, I had the honor of carrying the heavy flag. General Moshe Dayan, our Chief of Staff, took the salute.
Mm-hmm.
The head of the officers' school at that time was Colonel Israel Tal, who later became general and the father of the Israeli Merkava
That's
tank.
right.
He was also known as Mr. Armor.
נכון?
Yeah.
I admired him, and he was a great character.
Where geographically did you do kurs k'tzinim? Where were you located? Do you remember? Was it at Bad Echad? It was before Bad Echad. Bad Echad didn't exist.
What they call it? Machane Shmonim.
Machane Shmonim. Hold on, let me close this door behind us. This window. Machane Shmonim is where you did your kurs k'tzinim. Is that correct?
Not me. I did my kurs k'tzinim. My daughter did her kurs k'tzinim. And her tironut. My son both did their tironut. All at the same Machane.
Machane Shmonim.
Shmonim. Machane Shmonim was a passing out.
But that's where you did your kurs k'tzinim.
Yes.
Yeah, Machane Shmonim.
Yes.
Yeah. I was even in Machane Shmonim.
You also
For a
did.
very short period of time, but
Machane Shmonim was a lot of people passed through there.
a lot. I finished the course as a second lieutenant. What's a second lieutenant in Hebrew? Is that Sagam Seren
Second Mishneh.
Segen Mishneh? That's
Second Mishneh.
Second Mishneh.
And it's literally translated.
and rejoined my old armor unit. Due to the tense situation building up around us, the promise not to call me up for reserve duty never materialized, and I was called up at the end of 1955. So, explain to me. So you finish officer's course and you're in Tzva Keva, which means you're a full-time officer in the army, or they just call you on reserves?
They call me on reserve.
On reserve. So you have the army, which you do probably because you're a Katzin, you do a little bit more than normal people, probably about 2 months a year.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the time you're in your civilian life.
Mm-hmm.
After
But they called me up. In those days, the Miluim did the guard on the border.
Okay.
So they called us up all the time, 30 days, 40 days, 50 days.
Yeah.
Tzav Shmona. We used to call it Tzav Shmona.
It's still called Tzav Shmona. It says here, there was still problems with the terrorists coming across the Egyptian border. I made my platoon fill their water. Okay, so basically, you're on the border with Egypt, and at this
Gaza.
time, and Gaza. At this time, can you explain to me what's going on there? There's a lot of Can you explain to me the Fadayun situation and what's going on there?
They used to come across and steal pipes, not only Faudem. They would come. They were poor in Gaza, and we used to do the whole Gaza border. And they would come across and steal pipes. We had the United Nations there. I'll never forget the United Nations. I'd do my patrol in the morning. I'd pass the Indians, they'd salute me. I had the Yugoslavians, all different type United Nations units that were there. And we'd pass, they would salute me, I'd saluted them back, and we'd go on marching and covered our faces. And the Danes and the Norwegians, all these, were not permanent soldiers. They were United Nations draftees that people had just joined up to earn money. And they did the United Nations, they carried the United Nations, and they would try to take pictures of us. And they'd sell the pictures to the Egyptians. This was a business. And they used to shout at me, "You want pictures of Egyptians? We give you pictures. You pay us."
Really?
Yes. People don't know that. They were the United Nations, was young United Nations. They were civilians from Norway and what's they joined up to make money.
And of course they didn't stop the infiltration of the Egyptians coming.
Nah. The Egyptians did what they liked.
Was the border tense then? This is like 1955, 56. Was the border tense? It was tense then, wasn't it? There was a lot of skirmishes.
I won't call it tense, but there were skirmishes.
Yeah. And
you met anything, you saw anything, you shot.
Yeah. And let's remind the viewer at this point in time, Gaza is part of Egypt, and not part of Israel. Is that correct?
That's right. It's controlled by the Egyptians.
Controlled by the Egyptians. So basically, in another word, the UN are total wankers.
The UN what?
Are wankers.
What do you mean winkers?
Wankers. A wanker. They're bull.
They were worth nothing.
Yeah.
You want picture? You want picture? You want picture? How much you pay? How much you pay? You want Egyptian soldier picture?
And this is like before the Sinai campaign war. Yeah. Which we're going to get to very, very, very closely. It says here that you did a lot of maneuvers. This is before the war broke out. That you had your company.
Not only maneuvers. They used to call me up to do border duty.
Yeah.
It wasn't maneuvers. We control the border. Yeah. I used to make ambushes on Gaza. Yeah. Because they used to come across through the sea. I put a zamzam and I had a special way of putting my boys down. I made what they call an ambush on the Gaza border. And we had a zamzam, you know what a zamzam is? Zzz, the little zamzam, and we put it all the way into the water. And if anyone crossed at night, I'd have a machine gun in front, a 52 mortar at the back with Tura, and I'd have 2 more machine guns on each side. And they formed a little ambush. And anyone crossing the border at night, we would open fire. For instance, like the man that we killed that night counted 52 bullets in him. Everyone opened fire. He walked. He cut the zamzam.
What unit are you in? You're in a
armored.
This is 1955, 56.
Yeah, Zachlamim.
Zachlamim. Okay. It says here the maneuvers really prepared us for the October 1956 war, as 40 days of training together had become a good fighting unit. Okay. So now we're at Mivtza Kadesh. Mivtza Kadesh. Mivtza Kadesh. I was called up for my reserve duty on the 20th of October, 1956, and our unit moved south. We took positions in the southern corner of the Gaza Strip, not far from Rafiah Junction, and prepared. Now, can you explain to me very briefly what the Sinai Campaign War was all about? What happened? This is 1956, yeah?
If you remember, in 56, the Egyptians and the were fighting against the Europeans on control of the Suez Canal.
The British and the French.
And the British and the French, we went down all the way to the canal. The Arabs ran like hell. And 10 miles from the canal, we stopped and we watched the British landing at Portside. The British and French landed and they went inland. And we stopped there 10 miles away, that I remember, and we took up positions. That was the Sinai War.
It didn't last very long, did it?
No, because the Russians came in and there was a problem. What's Russia going to do? What's this? Is going to be international war? The Americans, we were little nothings.
Yeah. Yeah. It became a big scandal. Prime Minister Eden had to quit.
Not only that, it was a standoff between West and East.
Sure.
And no one knew what the Russians would do, and no one knew what's them.
Yeah. It says here, my unit on the 27th of October, under the my unit, the 27th Armor Brigade, under Colonel Barlev, who had also been my battalion commander in the 9th Palmach Commando Unit during the 1948 war.
That's right.
Consisted of the battalion of AMX light tracks, Sherman tanks, infantry
light tanks.
I was platoon commander for half tracks in the mobile infantry.
That's right. Together with the tanks, we had AMX with a 70mm gun, which was worth nothing. But one thing about the AMX tank, it was a light tank. It was actually a tank destroyer that could move fast. We had two types, with a 70mm gun and a 90mm gun. The 90 was the new one. The 70mm was the old gun, but the gun, 70mm didn't do much.
No, it didn't, did it?
No. The 90 was more effective. And we ran with them. They were very fast. You could run with the tanks. So the half-tracks would follow the tanks. I was with the half-tracks. I was a company commander, not a company, a mem.
I'm a mem.
Zachlamim. That's where I had my first boy killed. Why?
Tell me about that.
I had strict orders when we went into action. You got half-tracks. I would shout like hell if anyone stood up. If you're hidden behind the half-track, all the bullets hit the side of the half-track and you're protected. But some schmucks always, one of my soldiers said, I'll never forget, he got up and caught a bullet in his head. And I was so mad because I shouted at him, why should I lose a soldier for nothing? Never forget the way he caught the bullet in his head. After we shouted, I shouted at him, get down, get down.
Do you remember his name?
No, he had to look, see what's going on. He was the Iraqi, Israeli Iraqi, that I remember.
Died on the spot.
Yes, in the head. I mean, they were shooting all over us. You must know something about the Egyptians. They opened fire with everything they had when anything come near them. And they would continue firing long after you left. They were trigger happy. That's the only way they felt comfortable. I mean, the Egyptians didn't make commander raids like we did. They weren't built for it. They were the British Army. The Egyptian army was British Army.
No, the British Army had commando units.
The Egyptian army didn't have commando units, but they were British Army. The British were in Egypt, and they trained, the whole army was British.
So that's not good?
The Egyptian army was completely under British rule.
Okay.
It's like Britain attacking you, the same thing. The British gave us 24 hours to get out. And the Spitfires started coming over us.
That's in 48.
Yes.
I'm not talking about, we're talking about 56 now.
56, the same thing.
It says here, our attacking force in Rafiah Junction was made up with Golani Infantry Brigade and our 27th Armor Brigade.
That's right.
We were divided into attack groups of one platoon of tanks and one platoon of armor infantry.
That's right.
This infantry battalion started their attack on the right-hand side and walked into the anti-artillery firing zone, which was pre-zoned as a killing area.
Mm-hmm.
As our forces were getting off of their trucks,
they opened fire on us.
They opened fire. The Egyptian artillery opened fire, dispersing and making that in order to
prearranged, what they call prearranged fire. That means
what happened here?
They opened fire on the whole area. We were getting off the trucks, and a lot of boys were wounded, but they still went up the hill and captured it. We lost 100 boys were wounded, killed in action.
Were you in this battle yourself?
I came with the half tracks.
Okay.
I took part in the battle. I slept there. I remember they sent Labriut.
Thank you.
They sent me to the doctors. They sent me as a young officer to the nurses and doctors, and I had to train them how to take positions, how to sleep, how to wear, because they were front line now. So they sent me out of my unit to train the doctors and the nurses. So I had all these nurses, never forget, we had an American who was going to marry an Israeli. And his wife was a nurse with us. I slept with her. I mean, we all slept together. You know, the army. In Israel, the Palmachat was girls, boys, the same thing. You slept with the same sleeping bag next to each other, without any sex or anything. The Chevra. And it was perfectly normal to have the girls with us. And the Israeli women were not European women. They were more men than women, if you know what I mean, mentally.
No. So what about this woman? She was going to marry an American guy.
Yeah, as soon as
and
he waited in Tel Aviv, and as soon as she got off, he made her pregnant. She was married to him. She was married to him. She was a nurse, and she was married to this American.
Yeah. She was married to. But why did you mention her?
Because you had the vice versa of a normal. You had in every war in the world, you had the woman waiting for the man. You had the man waiting for the woman. His wife, he took her out and made her pregnant very quickly. That's the only way you could get her out the army. He took her to America.
And what about, hold on. This was the battle at the Rafiah Junction. So this is probably at the beginning of the war, because Rafiah, you guys went in on the coastal part up to Port Said. That's a long,
That's right.
that's a long journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long, long journey. We captured this. There's a position called El Jaridi. El Giradi.
Jaradi.
El Giradi. We conquered this position and continued on to El Arish.
That's right.
El Arish fell, including the airfield.
That's right.
I was now back at the same airfield which I had captured, where we had captured the Spitfire in 1948.
That's right. El Arish captured Spitfire, dragged the Spitfire. This was the
But
fun.
now it's 1956 and you're back at the same place. What have you achieved? What's going on? It's like you're back there again.
How many times we went back and forth into Sinai? The United Nations made you go out, and the Egyptians played the game with us. So we took it again, and again, and again. I took prisoner of war in all of them.
We stopped 16 kilometers away from the city, from the Suez Canal, and we watched the British ships unload their troops.
British and
to
French.
attack the Egyptian position.
It was British and French.
Yeah.
They attacked. You remember the Egyptians took over the Suez Canal,
Right.
and the
That's
French
why the
and
war
British
started.
decided to take it back.
Yeah, because they were invested in it.
That's right.
It's okay.
It was all their money.
Yeah, it's all their money. At El Arish, before we moved down, I met a newspaper reporter and gave him a letter for my wife.
On a piece of paper.
Tell me about that.
I didn't have paper. It was a piece of cement, a cement bag. Tore the paper off and gave him a letter. I wrote there to my wife, I'm all right, don't worry about me. And that's it. She never worried about me.
She didn't? In El Arish, we took many prisoners of war.
That's
I
right.
captured a captain who was a veterinarian surgeon attached to their camel
Camel
troops.
Corps.
Camel Corps. He asked me to take him on my jeep. As an officer, he did not want to walk in the mix with his privates. I felt sorry for him and walked ahead with him myself, while my soldiers brought up the 40 to 50 prisoners held behind us. So here you are, you meet a fellow officer you took prisoner, probably an intellectual guy, he's a doctor.
Yes.
You talked to him? Did you guys
Yes.
switch any words?
Well, I talked to all the Egyptians. I had no problem. I sent prisoner of war back. I had called a little boat at my position. I called a little boat. He'd come across and I'd give him prisoner. I didn't have water to give food. So I'd send back Egyptian prisoner of war until the United Nations came and the Israeli army came and made Seder. That means they registered all those that went back. The United Nations came to register because we were sending back, I was sending back hundreds of prisoners of war. I had no water, no food. So I sent them back. I put them on, you know what I mean? They put them on a jeep and kicked them out.
Yeah.
So they I'll never forget the Egyptians used to give me big kisses and big hugs. Come and see me in Cairo off the wall.
Yeah?
Because I let them go. They thought we were going to kill them. I mean, they had a mentality. I'll never forget the United Nations came back and they said, he said, you can't believe how hysterical these Egyptians are. I said, the United Nations went across to their side, and there was a woman there, a woman officer, and officers, and they were screaming. They cutting our balls off. They treating the prisoners badly. They're not giving them water. The United Nations said, but I drank the water together with them. I saw it myself. But they had such an Arab vision, imagination. They believed all these junkie stories.
All the propaganda that they
all
were
the
being,
propaganda
they were
stories.
They were being revealed.
So-
It says here, and one of the most memorable parts of the war was my visit to Mount Sinai, with the Greek Orthodox monastery at
That's
the
right.
foot of the mountain.
This was 4,000, a couple of 1,000-year-old monastery. And the Greek Orthodox monastery there, they used to get supplies up by a hand crane that went over the wall. So it was primitive in the middle of the desert, the middle of Mount Sinai, and you had this monastery there with the Greek Orthodox priests. And inside they had a small graveyard. And the graveyard had skeletons with black priest, Greek Orthodox priests, hoods and stuff. And all those that died, they had a small graveyard. So they never had enough. So they dig the next one up and bury the new one. And they put the skeleton of the other one under a black hood and that. So they had a couple of these statues of dead priests.
And you walked in there as Israeli soldiers.
That's right.
Did they have? Was there any problem with the priests or not?
They were Greek Orthodox Church. They were worried about the church.
All they were worried about was the church. Okay, now we're going to go to 6-Day War. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And here we go. Hold on just a second. You okay? Yeah, you're okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay, so now we're in 1967,
Mm-hmm.
in the 6-Day War. You are almost 40, you are 41 years old, 1967.
I'm working
Born in
back.
26?
1926.
Okay. You're 41 years old. In 1967, I did more reserve duty at the beginning of the year. On the 15th of May, 1967, my battalion, which is an armored mobile infantry unit, was called up. Our vehicles were World War II American half-tracks. Do you remember the 2-3 weeks before the 6-Day War? There was a lot of tension here. A lot of tension.
I was in. We were called up way before the rest because we were armored corps and we expected. And the Chankanim were making raids across the border. 101. Remember 101?
No, the 101 doesn't exist anymore. This is 1967.
But like 101, we were making raids
In 1967.
in every war. I mean, the war never stopped.
I understand. I'm just, yeah.
To me, the war never stopped. I was always called up.
Okay.
I spent a fortune of time doing reserve duty.
So where are you 2 weeks before the 67 war breaks? Where are you? You're called up on the 15th of May. War breaks out on the 6th of June. You have 3 weeks.
We went down towards Gaza. We went down and held the line across the wadis. We dug in on the Beersheba Wadi, the Wadi Beersheba. You know where Wadi Beersheba? And we held the line there. We crossed down there, and they dug us in case the Egyptians attacked. As if the Egyptians were attacking us, we dug in. That's where we spent there. Then we moved up, and we moved into Sinai. When the war broke out, we moved into Sinai.
Okay, we'll get to that. As the reserve soldiers were called up very quickly, most of them had no time to leave money with their families. So soldiers were asking for a couple of hours to leave for home.
No. My soldiers asked me. They didn't leave money or whatever. And a lot of the families then, they were Orientals. And there the husband is everything. And they left home very quickly, so they didn't leave money with a wife. And he gave the money. He was the boss. So it was a whole different mentality than today. And the women weren't that free, put it that way.
What's that?
The women weren't that free, so I had to send these boys home to give money.
I have to do something here. So
Okay, put it on top. I had to send these boys home so they could give money to their wives.
But there was a problem. But there was a problem.
Why?
Because they knew about the battle plans.
Oh, that's yes. Now, we didn't send them home so well, but every boy I sent home went with another soldier who didn't let him talk to anyone. He went home, gave his wife money, his wife, either one or two soldiers went with him. Because they knew the battle plan, so we all decided that we've got to keep them online. That we did. So
around the end of May, our unit moved south to take up defensive positions on the dry river called Wadi Beersheba. As the Egyptians had moved 7 divisions into the Sinai and Gaza Strip. Ali Muntar defensive position, which our unit was supposed to take in the event of hostilities breaking out. We watched it grow within 10 days from about 120 soldiers originally holding the position to 600 soldiers armed with heavy equipment. So
Egyptians reinforced all the lines. We watched them grow. What could we do? We're holding the line.
It's called in Hebrew Yamei Hamtana. Yamei Hamtana.
That's right.
I think was the situation tense before the war?
You've been in the army?
I'm asking you.
I'm asking you, you've been in the army?
Yes, I have, but yes, I am.
So it was this.
I've been in many
You make a tense or you don't make a tense. The person.
I'm saying that I've been in many situations in the army where things have not been tense at all. I'm asking you about this specific period.
Of course, we lived that life, so it wasn't tense. That's the way it was.
So it wasn't tense.
We couldn't. It's a way of living. Am I tense now? Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're living that type of life, you can't think of tense. You live your everyday life. You go on. You don't make tension. Tension comes automatically.
Okay. Again, it was called the waiting period, Yamei Hamtana. So on the 5th of June in the morning, we were lined up under our camouflage net amongst the trees at the side of the road.
That's right.
In a company formation so that we were ready to move fast. This is June the 5th. This is a day before the war breaks out.
That's right.
And let me see if the microphone's okay. At daybreak, we saw our airplanes flying over us, flip their wings in salute, and continue towards the Sinai. Suddenly, a dispatch rider on a motorbike came charging down between our columns, shouting, "Switch on your radios, switch on your radios." As soon as we opened our radios, we heard the password.
Sadin Adom.
Very right. Sadin Adom, red sheet. And the orders were move, move, move. We launched our attack against the Egyptian Air Force. By taking Rafiah, we would cut off the whole Gaza Strip. The paratroopers of the 7th Armored Brigade attacked Rafiah. Just like we did during the 1948 war, the Palmach unit attacked these same strongholds, but did not capture them. Then again in 1956, as a lieutenant with my armored infantry unit, we captured them and continued on the coastal to El Arish. Now again in 1967, the 7th Brigade was attacking along the same road to El Arish. This was the 3rd time that I was fighting in the same area.
That's right. With the same Egyptians. Except they had a lot of mines. We landed on mines. All our vehicles, we put the sandbags. It saved us. We still had a friend that lost his leg, Al Twerski.
Now we're talking about 67 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not 48.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're fighting the Egyptians in 48. You're fighting them in 56. Now you're fighting them in 67. Are they getting slowly better and better equipped? Are they becoming a little bit more sophisticated? Like the 6-Day War.
I never had time to look at that.
So what did you?
Not the way you look at it.
Okay, so
I can't do it.
Okay.
I'm fighting a man with.
I'm asking you to tell me some things that you remember from the 1967 war. What can you tell me about the 1967 war? Any incidents that you can remember? Any situations that you were in? This is why I'm here.
What did I write? Remind me.
Okay. Now it says, and now again in 1967.
We captured El Arish.
You did capture El Arish.
And we took prisoner of war.
Yeah. Our unit and the 60 made up reserves given orders bypass Rafiah and travel parallel to the coast road with the heavy sand dunes, which according to military experts
was impossible.
It was impossible. So by traveling that way, we were behind the Egyptian defenses that made them realize that they were being cut off.
And they ran away. We took a lot of prisoners through the sand dunes, came out of the sand dunes. At El Arish, we collected the prisoners and we sent them off to I had over 1,000 prisoners there that we captured. We rounded them up and I sent them off to Tel Aviv.
What is your rank during the 67 war? Are you a
company commander?
Company commander.
At the 6-Day War?
Yeah. 67, Sheshet Ayamim.
No, I'm a mem.
A mem? No, I think you're more than a mem. A mem you were in 56. In the Sinai
campaign. Oh, that's right. Wait.
Yeah.
In 56 I'm a mem,
yeah.
And here I am number 2 company commander.
Number 2.
I wasn't company commander yet, but I became a company commander afterwards.
And in Hebrew, what is your dalga in 67? What's Seren? You have 3 bars?
Wait, I'm trying to think. I had 2 bars, then I had 3. I was afterwards a Seren, yes. I became a Seren, up Seren. I went through all the ranks.
Do you remember this? While waiting to move on, we listened to a small battery radio. We heard the Egyptian news programs broadcast in English and in Hebrew. They were reporting that on major battles being waged towards Tel Aviv, with hundreds of Israelis dead and prisoners of war being taken. We were also listening to the Israeli news, on which we heard that East Jerusalem and the Western Wall had been captured by our paratroopers. On hearing the news, the boys cried, especially the old soldiers who fought in the 1948 war.
Yeah, where we were, our boys cried too, because these were Etzelnik and Rechnikim, boys that fought for the Haggad. And yeah, Jerusalem was ours. It was a very touching, moving position, put it that way. And a lot of the boys cried. I mean, from the sentimental point of view, you'd been battling you grew up all the life with this, Shana Baba Yerushalayim. Yeah, we got Yerushalayim. Motto Gore said, he got on the radio and said, I'm not trying to remember the words. And we literally cried.
Do you remember hearing all of this nonsense Egyptian propaganda on the radio? You wrote about it.
Listen, the Egyptians were broadcasting. Of course I wrote about it, because we heard we should listen to their broadcast. We couldn't believe it. We sitting here near the Suez Canal, and they are killing us in Tel Aviv by the thousands. They were counting how many dead bodies there were on the radio.
They're very good at propaganda.
Oh, were they good at that?
A lot of imagination.
What imagination? Egyptian imagination, Arab imagination.
Very good.
And they believed in it.
What's that?
They believed in
it.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, but we later learned that was to hold the morale in Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah.
We used to laugh. We sitting here in El Arish, and they telling how they're killing us on the way to Tel Aviv. And details he's giving, how many dead bodies here and how many there, couple of hundred there, and we're advancing towards Tel Aviv more. We should be in Tel Aviv by tonight.
So in the 6-Day War, you're again in the northern part of the Sinai, just like you were in '56, and just like you were in also in Palmach. It says here we were now moving up for an attack to capture the biggest airfield in Sinai, Bir Gafga.
Bir Gafkafa. Gafkafa.
Gafkafa. What's Bir Gafkafa?
It's a little Arab village. And when we attacked it, we made a commander raid on it. You forget the British were in Sinai. This was part of their protection. They gave us 24 hours to pull out of Sinai, the British.
You're talking about the 1956 war.
That's right.
We're talking now about 67.
Ah.
It's okay, don't worry about it. It says here, I'll freshen your memory, okay? It says here, the 9th Light Tank Battalion set up a night defensive position on the main road.
That's right.
Leading to the Suez Canal, which was about 80 kilometers away. The position was about 15 kilometers west of Bir
Gafkafa.
Gafkafa, an Air Force base that we had captured that morning along the main road to the Suez Canal. As there was no moonlight and it was pitch dark, they formed a tank lager. Lager. You know what a tank lager is? No.
You remember the old West? You'd form with your wagons a lager. Now, a tank lager, when we made attack, we couldn't see, we didn't have olive. From every tank, you took the machine gun off, put it next to the tank. So you had the tank here, machine gun here. So you formed a firing front from anyone coming in. That means you were covered completely this way. And in the middle, you put all your light vehicles. It's something built like the Old West. You'd build your circle around and have an opening from the back where you would come in with your own vehicles. And you kept your light vehicles in the middle. And each tank we had, it was there with their tank and the machine gun.
Yeah. What's it called again? A tank?
Huh?
What's it called again, this tactic? A tank lager?
Lager. Okay. We formed a a lager of tanks because we couldn't see them and they saw us.
It says here, somewhere around 3 a.m., the Egyptian 4th Armored Division was moving up for a counterattack
That's right.
with their heavy tanks, Russian T-55s with 100 millimeter guns, the night vision equipment. The Russian tanks formed a line in front of our defenses
That's right.
positions, made up of light Amtrak tanks, and with their 90 millimeter guns. As the Egyptians had night vision, they could see our forces, but we couldn't see them.
That's right.
They opened fire somewhere around 3 a.m. in the morning. One of the first vehicles to be hit was the 81 millimeter mortar half track. Some of its shells exploded.
That's right.
Our tanks tried to return fire, but the shells bounced off the heavy armor of the T-55 tanks, which means that the Egyptians on the 6-day war, they have better equipment now than they had before.
Of course. They had first-class equipment. They had the best of Russian equipment. And we didn't. You forget the West didn't support us.
Right.
What we had was tanks built by us. We take the old tanks and add another gun to it, so that was something like that. But the Egyptians had all the first-class Russian equipment. The Russians gave them everything. That was it.
Our company was called out of the middle of the night, and we started moving up to support them. But being soft vehicles, half tracks, with no tank support, we held back as reserve.
We were half tracks. We had no tank support,
Sure.
so they held us back.
Yeah.
But Shammai Kaplan was killed, and he went running with his tank on the side and shooting up the Egyptians. The Egyptians were fighting on the road, and he was running through the sand dunes and shooting them up from the side. He got killed afterwards.
It says here, we reached the canal. We reached the canal the next day. My company took over defensive positions opposite the city of Ismailia at the center of the canal. One reserve brigade took over the holding of the line along the Suez Canal. This is kind of... So do you remember reaching the canal in the 6-day war?
Yes. The canal had a higher wall. We patrolled it. We reached the canal and you went up. We saw the other side, and they were shooting just from the other side, and we were shooting from this side. We traveled below the canal had a high wall. We traveled behind that so they wouldn't shoot us. That's where we did our supply units. So we used to supply them like that, and the commandos came across a couple of times to blow up our ammunition and stuff. They blew up a couple of 100 tons of ammunition with the commandos. I think I wrote about it. The blowing up of, and the empty shells all over the place. They couldn't come and help us because they had to go through all these brass pieces of shells that exploded. The shell cases.
It says here, being an English speaker, whenever international newspaper reporters arrived, I was attached to the Israeli military escort, as my duty was to explain to them what we were permitted to doing behind lines. I met many famous reporters and media people, for instance, the Time Life photographers. My family from abroad would send me clippings from their local newspapers with articles in which I featured.
The newspaper people speaking English, I was given the job. Being an Anglo-Saxon, they came and we had the world newspapers running around there. And they wanted information. That's all they wanted. Stories, information they could sell. And speaking English, my MP said, go talk to them. So I was giving them information and telling the bullshit stories. I don't know if they were bullshit or true. That's it. I think I wrote about all that.
There was one incident that I recall when we were gathering Egyptian prisoners of war. Most of them who were barefoot, and many of them burnt feet from the walking without army boots in the hot desert sand. All the troops in the area were brought to the POWs out of the desert into our little prison camp. Since the Egyptians had cut off the main fresh water supply from the other side of the canal, we did not have enough water for ourselves, but we managed to get a couple of big drums of water, which we shared with them. Also, we gave them some Egyptian army rations that we found. They were very hungry and very thirsty, as they had been roaming around the desert for a good couple of days.
And we gave them boots. We found a whole machzan of boots, Egyptian army boots, and we gave it to them, so they wouldn't burn their feet anymore. They kissed my hand, and they kissed, when I sent them back, I had the little boat, I've got pictures of it there in my book, I think, of rowing across the canal. I had so many prisoners, what I do with them, I put them on a little boat and sent them across back to Egypt. I let a couple of thousand go until my army unit, the United Nations came in and made Seder. That means they registered everyone that we sent back to make it Musudar. I remember the general came down to us and told...
What general? The UN?
Israeli general came down and told me what's the matter with everything.
Excuse me?
He told me, the Egyptian, to give them water, treat them nice with them. Treat them like good prisoners of war. It was, well, I took prisoner of war in every war, so I had speaking English also helped me a lot. I tell you also, I discovered that my size was good. I'm big, with a long beard, with a vicious looking man with red eyes. And I made an impression because the newspapers wrote about me. The 6'6" Israeli officer. And that's it.
Within days of the ceasefire, we had too many prisoners of war that were coming through the desert. Wait a second, the canal break, I asked.
I sent 4 truckloads of prisoners back with one of my boys and one of my half-tracks, who was the Haganah in Beersheba arrested him because he was a Yemenite.
Yeah, you like that.
Oh, you got that?
We're going to take a little break now.
Okay. You want something to eat?
Hold on.
Huh? You'll have lunch with me?